We're almost there.
Okay.
It says we're live on my screen.
It says we're live as well.
Okay, so we might be live. Mine says it's setting it up.
Okay.
This could be live right here. Okay, 3, 2. Okay, perfect. We're looking good. All right. Well, welcome to the Overflow podcast show. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. It is such a joy to get to gather together and reflect on the sermon and talk through what we learned, what we got, but most importantly, how to practically engage with these topics and concept in our everyday life. So thank you so much for being here. We have, once again, Pastor Juno and Pastor Ryan B, and I'm Pastor Ryan K. And it's our aim to dive in deeper as we continue through our series on the spiritual disciplines, intentional practices to grow deeper in our faith, to grow with God, and to grow in awareness of who we are. So, Juno, can you give us just a short recap of your sermon from yesterday, and then we'll go on from there?
Yep. Really, again, we've started off with the idea of friendship, the discipline of friendship, and not just friends for the sake of friends, but closer, authentic. Often I use the word spiritual friendship. Some of that you can go to have conversations that maybe you wouldn't have with just anybody. There was the friendships community. Again, in my mind, that would be a collection of those spiritual friendships, but it may not, depending on how you're wired. There may be people who are part of your tribe, so to speak, your community, that may not always agree with you theologically and may be quite different. And I think in the sense of community that could be healthy, and that may be healthier for some people. And then finally, hospitality, which is really the idea of focusing on other people, focusing on, if you think about it, your home, your guest, you got friends coming in, how are you welcoming them, having them feel safe and that they're wanted where you're at. And then we could even take that a step further to, as the church, how hospitable are we as a church in welcoming other people in?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks for sharing. And just a reminder, if you're joining us today, feel free to write in any questions on our YouTube, and we'll be happy to respond with that. So our first question we have is, how do you approach friendships? Yeah, so gents, let's talk about friendship. How do you approach friendships?
Ryan, you want to go for that one, buddy?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's really important in our lives, in our walks with both in faith and just every day, that we have someone who we can call our people, who we can call our tribe a little bit, as Juno was talking about. And I think it's just important. I mean, and Juno mentioned it in the sermon yesterday, the adage, like if one falls down, another can pick them up, support each other through hard times, through whenever we're struggling, or, through new life experiences. And for example, we're part of a life group, and I think a life group is a great way to get connected and to experience friendships and to experience community in a really great way. And I know that me and my wife do not have kids, but if one day we do have kids, it'll be awesome to have all of these people in our life group who've already been down that road, who can give us advice, who can give us counsel, and who can help us walk through that when I'm sure there's a lot of craziness to that life that I don't know about yet, that I will learn at some point in the future. So it's really just good to do life together. And that's just such an important part of what it means to be a Christian, what it means to be the church, what it means to have a healthy life rhythm and balance. It's really important. I think, again, small groups is a great way to get plugged into that.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it's so tricky because, I'd say we were created for community, right? You could see that in creation with Adam and Eve. But community and friendship, it's risky, to have a friend, to put yourself out there. Are they going to reciprocate that love and that care? And there's definitely some risk there. And I've really been reflecting on the fact that for most of my life, all of my friends have simply been people that I found myself near. Classmates, teammates, club mates, a friend of a friend, or someone that I just found something in common with. And what I've been learning in my last season of life is that I need to be intentional to choose friends, and I need to be intentional to cultivate healthy spiritual friendships, because I've kind of just allowed myself to sort of coincidentally run into people and then I guess sort of keep up a conversation. But I've really been working these last few years. How do I intentionally reach out? How do I intentionally give and serve and cultivate this friendship, to build it up and to invest in it? And so that's been something I've really been growing in and would definitely encourage. I think we are very much influenced by our friends, and we're very much supported by our friends. And I've always felt like we need to be the friend we wish we had.
Well, it's interesting as lead pastor, and I've preached about this too, I think before Ryan B got here. But it's different, I think, being lead pastor. And maybe all of you in your own roles as, quote, pastors, sometimes that could be just a little bit more of a challenge on creating some friendships, because for many people, it is really hard for them to take off our hats of a pastor and look at us as a Ryan or a Ryan K or Ryan with kids, and versus this is who these guys just aren't pastors. Pastors don't define them, and I will confess, too often a pastor title for me does define me. And so a couple of years ago, I started to, now this sounds, and I thought about this before, I started to go to the internet for some friendships. Now that sounds horrible, but they weren't risque friendships. They were just some key, like Ryan Kay said, key people that I have known for 20 years, and rekindled some of those friendships. So I could ask take off my pastor's hat and ask some questions and not expect the pastoral return, or, well, you're a pastor, you shouldn't have these feelings, or people being so either predictable in their response or guarded in their response because I was a pastor. But 10 years ago, I would have thought, you are selling out the value of friendship if you just go with people online. And I probably could have preached a good sermon about that. Well, next week's sermon is about face-to-face conversations. But anyway, but there was that season, and that was just really rich and helpful for me.
Yeah, for sure. And I would say anyone who functions as kind of like a go at it alone mentality, or nobody really knows who I really am, that's just not healthy. It's just not helpful. We need to find people that we can invest in and can invest in us, and we can go through life together and be there for one another. Ryan, I love that you talked about life groups, and that's such a great cultivation ground for friendships and connection, because it's hard to build a friendship when you don't have anything in common. So it's helpful to invest in people you're on the same team with, or a coworker, or you're in a life group with, or you're at church together, or whatever it is. And especially in this time of quarantine and COVID-19, friendships take, I think, even more intentionality and work to cultivate, but are even more fruitful and beneficial. And so even if it's jumping on FaceTime and having lunch with a friend who's also having lunch on FaceTime with you, and just talking and just spending time with them, that's important. And I've definitely built that into my rhythm and routine. I try to have lunch with a couple of friends every week. Just, how are you doing? Like, what's going on? How's life? What are you struggling with? What's a blessing? And let's laugh about some good old times, or whatever it is. But I've just done some of those rhythms because we've got to invest in our friendships, and we need that support. Quarantine, I think, has highlighted that we cannot do this alone.
Mm-hmm. And go ahead, Juno.
No, they heard me out.
All right. And I also like what you were saying earlier, Ryan, about how we can't wait, and Juno, you talked about this in your sermon yesterday too. We can't wait for other people to make the first move. And I think to practice all of these things well, spiritual friendships, community, and hospitality, to practice all those things well, it starts with not being selfish in your pursuit of it. For example, you don't make good friends by being selfish all the time. Like sometimes, and Juno talked about this sermon, you have to make sacrifices. You have to be willing to inconvenience yourself. And that's a way you show love and maybe make that, like, reach out and make that kind act that lets someone know you cares about them, that helps deepen and spark a deeper version of friendship. Um, and and I think it's important, like, that we, we're willing to take the initiative. We don't wait for the other person, because Jesus did not live a life, a selfish life. And as Christians, we're not called to live a selfish life either. We're called to reach out and care for others. Um, and I really think that is a key component of friendship, that we get into our heads that this isn't about me, and it's not about what I'm getting out of this friendship. But it's also about what I'm pouring into this friendship, and then how we mutually support each other not in a selfish way, but in a way that builds both people up, a way where we're both giving to the relationship.
Yeah, in fact, Ryan, as you were talking, I thought too often, I think some people live the life of, or I'm who I am and I'm entitled to some friendships, or versus, no, you're the one. I think we have to go out and we have to take the initiative. And even with COVID-19, folks, it's like, don't wait for people to call me. Who am I calling? Who am I texting? Who am I reaching out to just to check in? And that should be happening even out of COVID-19, that we are taking the initiative to connect with other people on a more personal level.
Yeah, for sure. And I often think about, okay, whose friends list would I make? Like, if someone were asked, who are your friends? How many people or which people would say that I am on that list of friends? And I think that's helpful for me to think, like, ooh, am I being intentional to reach out, and am I being intentional to engage? And for those who are feeling constantly not good enough, like you're not a good enough friend, I would just say, even the simplest or smallest things are helpful. You don't have to go out of your way to completely fix someone's life or be there for every life moment. But yeah, a simple text or a call or email or check-in or a prayer, or a comment on social media, all these little things, they all mean something, and so a little bit goes a long way, especially in friendship.
Yep. Well, I have a line that I've used at every church, that, there's a cost to community. Now, you would like this, Ryan, because since you oversee our life groups, whenever I wanted to do something, my boss would say, well, what's the cost of that? I say, there's a price for community. And this is one of those prices, and try to get my budget increased. Well, really, there's a price for friendship too. And it takes sacrifice and it takes commitment. And if it's just out of convenience, then I think all of us realize after a while, you know what? Yeah, that was a nice person, and it was a great acquaintance. But in reality, that's really all it was, because it really was a friendship. You don't even want to use that word. It was an acquaintance out of convenience, versus somebody who was really wanting to invest in my life and me in his or her life.
Yeah. And I think something funny about friendships is they're usually less official and less organized and less articulated than, like, maybe a dating relationship. Like, for example, when Hartley and I were dating, it's like, do you want to go on a date with me? When we were official, it was like, do you want to be my girlfriend? When we were getting married, it's like, do you want to marry me? And then it was like, we are married, like, there's all these steps. But there's so many friendship relationships that it's like, are you my friend? Are you my best friend? Do you think I'm your friend? Do you think I'm your best friend? Like, where do we stand? And, like, there's so many weird kind of moments of, like, we don't want to be overcommitted. Like, oh, I'm your best friend. You're just like one of my casual friends. Like, now I feel this uneven pressure, or vice versa. Or, like, I thought you were my main person, but you got all these other friends on the side. And, like, there can just be a just kind of a funny dynamic there. And I think, as best as we can articulate, or DTR, as many of my friends would say, define the relationship, I think it's helpful to be on the same page. Now, that doesn't mean you have to say, like, are you going to be my best friend? Then I'll be your best friend and we'll work that out. Sounds like a conversation I had in first grade. But I think it's helpful to know, like, hey, I consider you a friend. We consider each other mutually friends, and we're going to be there for each other when we can. And I think that's helpful.
Yes. Yep. Enough of that subject.
Okay.
Unless somebody's in a question I can't read. So
Yeah. Let's talk about community. So what has been your experience with community, And what would you recommend? And I know that this is kind of very consistent with friendship, but what else would you add to this conversation about the importance of community and how you engage with it?
I'm going to say it's like saving up for retirement, that we all know we should, and we really should, but it's easier said than done. And it's a different feel than friendship, because I think we all know, I know I need community, but I really need to be intentional with it, because otherwise it shifts really from community to the Lone Ranger pretty easy. Even though I have
Yeah,
friends, that's still different than community, a collective gathering of people who know me and love me and, well, not only hold me accountable, but who I can reach out to at times. And uh, yeah, I just think sometimes community, we just take it for granted. But I think COVID-19 has helped realize, ooh, I uh, now that we can't meet as easily or as often, it's like, no, that community really made a difference or makes a difference.
exactly. Yeah, I would say same, we're totally created for community, but there is a price to pay. There is a cost and there's a sacrifice. And as a pastor overseeing life groups and getting people involved with them, I see people's hesitation to commit to a regular meeting and to a group of people they're not sure on. And there's a lot of hesitations and there's a big cost and people are cautious to commit. But those who jump in and dive in, 95% of the time are so grateful that they did. They find connections and relationships and depth and intimacy that they couldn't find anywhere else. And our life group, when we started meeting on Zoom, once quarantine was initiated, we were just so grateful to just get to talk to people who knew us and work through things. And we've done parade parties and we've done hangouts and different things through this quarantine time together because we've already had those relationships established. And, for me, it's really difficult to make community happen on what I would call an event basis. Like, let's do this one thing and show up and hang out. It's got to be built into my regular routine. So I know every Thursday night I'm with my life group and we're connecting there because I see them every week. It's much easier to say, oh, hey, you want to go for a bike ride, or you too? Oh, let's all get a bike ride together on Saturday. Let's do something. It's easier to build off that than if there's nothing happening. Or back when we were playing baseball with my son, I knew I'd seen the same teammates and team parents and such every week, and I could build off of that kind of a regular rhythm. So yeah, my big encouragement is not only to invest in community, but to invest in a regular rhythm where you're with consistent people that you can get to know one another and be there for one another and support each other and talk about life. I really believe that we were created to be on mission together, on mission for the gospel together. And as best we can do that, I think we'll see greater fulfillment and success in our life.
Yeah, and the thing that I want to add to this conversation is the idea of that community goes beyond, again, because we just talked about friendships. I think community goes beyond just people we consider our close friends and things like that. And for example, obviously we think of the church as a great and awesome expression of community, and New Life is a great expression of community. And I think the beauty of that, of the community we see at church on Sundays, is that we have the different generations coming together in the same place, from people with grandkids or even great grandkids to to Shiloh, Ryan's son, running up and banging on the drums after the service, as he likes to do, and seeing,
Or during the service.
or during the
During the
service. Yeah. But seeing that, it's so good to be in a community, in a place where, to see the little kids running around and feeling, expressing joy and having fun in that way. And I think that in that area of community, that we are all in a space where we can learn from one another. We can learn from the wisdom of those who are older and have been there before us, and we can, be reminded and learn from the joy of the kids and things like that. But I also think that another aspect of that, in the context of community in the church and in that more group dynamic, is again, the idea of we all need to sacrifice in some way for there to be the best version of community. Because the best version of community isn't everyone coming together to get something out of it. Like, oh, I go to the church because it has a good kids ministry, or good this or a good that, and then I get what I want out of it. That's because I get what I want out of it is not what community is about. The best communities are where we all come together and we find our place, and then we're willing to give and give in some way. And I think about the church in Acts 2:42-47, where it says the believers all had everything in common and they sold all their possessions to give to those who had need. It's this idea of just like being willing to sacrifice everything for the good of the whole. And I'm not saying, we need to sell all our things or anything like that, but this idea of being willing to sacrifice and give for the good of the whole, and then enjoying that together. And I think there's a beauty in community in that way. And I think the best way we can form community in New Life is we all find our place where we're receiving and being built up, and then we're able to give back to our community and show love in that way. And I think that's just an awesome expression of community as well.
And then also, I want to say, I think people will say, oh, I don't need community. Oh, I know people around here, except when the crap of life hits the fan, all of a sudden, there's nobody there. And, especially when we're doing these funerals and, well, doesn't the church provide a lunch? Well, no, your friends provide that lunch. Well, if they're not connected anywhere, then they realize, oh, I've known some people, but I really wasn't in community where people just love and care for, and they all work together and do this lunch for us, for my loved one. And so it's easy to say you don't need it until life gets tough, and then you realize, yeah. And I think COVID-19 has been a great reminder that we do need it. And so if we've been just coasting through for a while, it's probably a good reminder that, okay, I need to be intentional with the people in my life group that, even though we've been in the same group for 20 years, I need to be more intentional with them. Anyway.
Yeah, I love what you guys are saying. And, Juno, I totally agree. We can have a bunch of acquaintances and think we're in community, but have no real deep relationships where people really know us and we're challenged and we're encouraged and we're growing. And I think that's really important to have those depths of relationships. And even what you were saying too, Ryan, we can bring our consumeristic mentality into community. And I see this all the time. As soon as the life group or as soon as the community stops being a benefit to me, I'm out, right? And I see a lot of people just leave groups or leave community because it stopped benefiting them. And what people don't understand is community takes investment. And one thing that's beautiful about marriage, and I had the privilege of marrying someone, just a few days ago, but is that they're signed up to be there for each other forever. Like there's no way out, And I think community almost needs these covenants of saying, we're going to be there for each other. We're going to be in this together, even when it's not benefiting me, even when it's kind of hard. And I know that that's a balance, right? I'm not asking you to join a life group that you absolutely hate for years and years and years and just suck it up and just deal with it. But what I am saying is I think we leave community too early and too quickly, and we move on too fast when it stops being of a great benefit to us personally. And I think we need to have more of an intentional desire to invest in people rather than necessarily have to always be benefiting from it.
Yeah, and then one more thing too, Ryan, Kay, we've talked and said, when something weird happens in the family, whether it's you're separated as a couple, the kids make some decisions you are embarrassed about, that you do not support, that's often when people step away from community. And in reality, that's when they need to dive into it more and just be there. But yet, because of probably because of our egos, we're just embarrassed, we don't be around it. We pull back, and then it's the very thing you need it most is when you're in those vulnerable, painful, embarrassing situations.
Yeah, that's so true. And I've been talking with some life group leaders and such, and it's been really interesting to see in some of their groups, some of the people are gravitating even more to the life group and are more engaged than they ever were and are really pressing in. And some people have just totally faded out and they're just not engaged. And it is interesting in crisis how people respond. And some people are withdrawing and some people are engaging. And I would definitely encourage, like you're saying, to engage and press in and not just withdraw. Sometimes it's helpful to take a step back and reevaluate so you can reinsert. But I'm really prayerful that this time of quarantine is a time where everyone's growing deeper in their faith and growing with each other and not fading out or fading away or just kind of letting things go. So how do we, it's kind of wrapping this up, how do we engage with hospitality? What does this look like during quarantine, outside of quarantine? What role does hospitality have in friendship and community? And how can we be hospitable people?
Well, again, as an intergenerational church, our senior saints probably had this gift, this expression down a whole lot more than the younger people of the church. And that's where just by probably modeling it, people will realize, oh, look at Mrs. So and so. They just loved on us. And so I think it needs to be modeled. But I also think community helps us because misery likes company. And if opening up your home to others and not feeling like it's a checklist of how nice everything is, but just a place of love and of safety and of welcoming spirit, I think to do that with 2 or 3 other couples helps you learn and become better at hospitality.
Yeah.
I think we just have a huge bar for ourselves that we set, and in reality, those who are needing the hospitality, they could give a rip about these high expectations.
Yeah. And I would say too, one of I think what you're talking about, Juno, is one of the barriers of hospitality is we want to put together the most excellent meal, the cleanest home, the most amazing event, this party that we're spending hours and hours and hours and hours putting together. And we have such a high standard so that somebody feels like comfortable. But really, at the end of the day, who are we really doing that for? Is it really for them, or is it really for us to feel good about ourselves? And I find that is a huge temptation, that when somebody comes over, they're usually just grateful to just be around and just, oh, wow, this is great. Just some food and hanging out. It doesn't need to be this huge elaborate meal, this huge elaborate like setup and all this stuff going on. It can be really simple. And I think we make a huge mistake when we create this elaborate barrier for hospitality. And it's really at the end of the day, just to make ourselves feel good. The other thing that the hospitality reminds me of is my engagement in this place is not about me, but about making others feel comfortable and welcome. And what if every time we met as a life group, or every time I met in a Zoom meeting, or every time I met with people or gathered, my primary focus was helping other people to feel welcomed and engaged and a part of the group, rather than constantly inserting myself. And I remember this as being a youth pastor, I would often do this, especially with new students. You want them to feel welcomed and you want to connect them with new students. And it wasn't about what fun can I do and what can I play and how crazy can I go at youth group. It's like, who needs to be noticed, who needs to be cared for, and who needs to be talked to. And I think that's a helpful reminder.
Let me just share a little plug for Ryan's group. Not that he needs anybody else in his group, but you guys meet on the campus. And so back in the day, I would often swing by as I was leaving and I would see all these cars. And so I'd buzz in and say hi to your group. And they were always, or they always are, just like overly welcoming to me. Come on in. Oh, you must smell the food, Pastor. Have some food, but it's just like, again, in my role of I'm the pastor, sometimes I just don't know when to or if I should, but they're always just welcoming me in. And some of the guys got together one Sunday after a church service, and I think the women were all going out. The guys had the kids, and I went over to the person's house, and they're just like, "You are welcome here anytime. Just show up." And so that's just even as the lead guy, I enjoyed here. That made me feel welcome. That made me feel loved. And yep, all the kids were all over the place. Luckily, the wives weren't there, but it was just good. And I just think, that's how we need to be living our lives, open-handed and welcoming people in. So,
Yeah.
good job, Ryan. You've
Yeah.
modeled it well.
Yes, excellent.
Now, okay, not to be sexist here, but having flashbacks of being married, I just think even though I was single until I was like 33, I have anybody over and come on in, and I didn't care what the place looked like. Once I got married, that changed. My wife was much more concerned, and she says, "Yeah, but people reflect that back on the woman in the relationship, not the guy." So you may think it's great having a messy apartment or a home, come on over, but it all comes back to the woman. And so I just think that's culturally, we need to switch that up still and not have these high expectations, because that's, at least I'm having some flashbacks of some conversations about, we just can't invite people over when stuff's all over and, baby stuff's here and there. And because it comes back to her and how she's feeling about the event. And she's just feeling, depending on your background, just critiqued in everything in that house. And so I think as people, we need to move away from the appearance of things. But anyway.
Yeah. And I know, like, for Hartley and I, it's about kind of finding that balance of how can we all feel comfortable here. If the place is a disaster, she's going to be stressed about it and she's going to feel worried about it. And so just finding, okay, what's a realistic level of like cleanliness and hosting that we can pull off, that we feel comfortable in, but we're not overdoing it, too much.
Yeah. And I think it's all about, I think hospitality is all about just having the mentality and idea of, again, not what's in it for me, but open-handedness and generosity, and how can I bless others. And I also, like what you said, Ryan, is like sometimes we create like high barriers to hospitality by like, oh, everything has to be perfect. We have to make this great meal and the house has to look perfect. And if hospitality is like, if being hospitable to someone requires that much work to do it, you won't do it as often. So I think it's like, how can we be hospitable in the everyday and be just welcoming and open to people, like the guys in the group were to you, Juno, and just saying, you're welcome anytime. How can we welcome people in? And like, for example, if you see someone new in the church who hasn't been there before, like how can we go up and introduce ourselves to them and welcome them in and invite them to something awesome that's going on? Maybe they've been there for a few weeks and you're starting to notice them. Look for those types of opportunities to practice hospitality and to practice that type of open-handedness and generosity and love, where again, it's not focused on what am I getting out of this, but more on what I'm giving and what I'm contributing. Because when we all have that contributing and giving mindset together, that's when the best friendships happen. That's when the best community happens. That's when the best practices of hospitality happen, where people feel welcomed and loved. So I just think that we can do that so much as a church, and we can be maybe one way to be hospitable is by sacrificing, maybe like, oh, I like at church, I like the music a certain way, or I like things a certain way, but being willing to let that go to be hospitable to others who might, prefer it in other ways. And again, not focused on ourselves and our own needs, being focused on the needs of the other.
No doubt.
Yeah, sweet. Well, that all sounds good. Well, hopefully this has been helpful for all of you watching, just to be encouraged with how to practically live this out and engage with it in your daily life. And thanks so much for joining us on the Overflow. We'll be here every Monday at 12 o'clock on YouTube Live. And yeah, well, thanks again for joining us, and we'll catch you next time.
Adios.
See you later.